Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of The Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario, and online experiences to anyone in this mortal realm. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director, and it is my privilege to be your haunted host for this episode. Today's story begins with the weather. The winter of 1855 was not merely cold, it was punishing. From January through March, the temperature across the south of England barely rose above freezing. The rivers Tyne and Exe, normally busy, living things, were at times locked solid under iron-hard ice. So thick in some places that people would drag dining tables out onto the ice to enjoy their dinner. On the night of Thursday, February 8th, a heavy snowstorm swept across Devonshire. It buried the towns of Topsham, Lympston, Exmouth, Teignmouth, and Dawlish under a clean, sparkling, unbroken white. Around midnight, the snow stopped, and a profound silence fell over the county. When the sun rose on Friday, February 9th, the pristine white sheet had been broken in a most unexpected and shocking way. A baker in Topsham was the first to see them. He stepped out before dawn to start his day of work and stopped. There in the fresh snow was a trail of markings that made no sense. They were not the paw prints of a dog or cat, not the double track of anything that moved on four legs. These were hoof-prints, shaped like the shoe of a small donkey, about 4 inches long and 3 inches wide. But it was their arrangement that stopped him cold. They were laid out in a single, unbroken line. Consider what that means. A donkey's legs move in pairs, left and right alternating, to leave a single file of prints. Whatever made them would have to walk upright, like a person, a biped, stepping 1 foot precisely in front of the other. And what left these bizarre impressions in the snow? That will be the focus of today's episode. But before we get to that, our Alone in the Dark experience at Cumberland Village, just outside of Ottawa, is returning for a limited run of nights starting the first weekend of March. Take a spooky drive out into the country for a night of paranormal investigation in some of the city's oldest buildings. If you grab your tickets by March 5th, you can save $13 per person with the promo code GIVEASIGN. That's the best deal of the season, and with so few dates, spots will go quickly. Book your investigation today. If that sounds like a perfect evening adventure, but you're closer to Toronto, we have you covered. Alone in the Dark at the Village at Black Creek is now running every Saturday evening. Come join us in the dark at one of our most active sites, where honestly, you never know what might happen. And, of course, we have ghost tours running every weekend now in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto. You won't notice the chill in the air. You'll be too busy feeling the ones our storytellers are sending down your spine. Find all the details and book your tickets at hauntedwalk.com. And as a Haunted Talks listener, don't forget to use the promo code Haunted Talks, all one word, at checkout to save 15% off your tickets. We'll see you in the shadows. If you're enjoying the show, please follow, rate, and review wherever you listen. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky, all at Haunted Walk. The baker wasn't alone in his confusion for long. By mid-morning, something strange had become something alarming. Reports were flooding in from across the county. Not one garden, not one village. The tracks appeared in over 30 towns and villages across Devon and into Dorset. All made in 6 hours between when the snow ended at midnight and dawn. But it wasn't just the distance that these impressions were found that defied explanation. It was what the tracks did along the way. They did not go around obstacles. They went through them, over them, across them. The most baffling piece of evidence emerged at a 14-foot wall in Teignmouth. For any known animal, a barrier of that height should have been an absolute dead end, or at the very least, the site of a frantic struggle. But the track suggested something else entirely. They approached the base of the wall with a steady 8-inch stride, and they emerged on the other side with the same rhythm, completely unbroken. The snowdrifts at the foot of the wall remained perfectly intact, showing no signs of a creature clawing for grip or sliding back down. There were no landing marks, no brushed away snow, just a single, impossible transition. It leaves you with the sense that the wall wasn't an obstacle to be climbed, but a detail the entity simply chose to ignore. In a similar but creepier report from Exmouth, a man watched the trail come up his front garden path, approach to within a few feet of his front door, and then stop. The prints began again at the back of the building on the other side of the house, as if whatever made them had passed directly through the walls. Other residents looked up and found the prints crossing their snowy rooftops of their cottages, moving across the slates, over the frozen spine of their roofs while the families slept beneath. In one report, the tracks led directly into the mouth of a drain pipe, 4 inches in diameter. The prints reappeared at the other end, continuing on, as if whatever this was had simply compressed itself down, passed through, and then kept walking. At the River Exe, the prints stopped at the water's edge, which, on that day, was flowing. They resumed on the opposite riverbank, a distance of about 2 miles. When people noticed that the prints were cloven, split like a hoof, there was only one conclusion that seemed to carry weight. Only one figure in the moral vocabulary of the residents who walked on cloven hooves and left no trace of his passage. Some witnesses even claimed the prints looked scorched, branded into the snow as if by something hot. The ice in places melted all the way down to the frozen earth beneath. Needless to say, newspapers ran with this story. The Times reported that the superstitious go so far as to believe they are marks of Satan himself. The Western Times noted that Exmouth had been thrown into a state of alarm by news that his Satanic Majesty had visited in the night. One Exeter paper noted, with barely concealed contempt, that the poor were full of superstition, which I think tells you something about the fear and about those doing the reporting. In Dawlish, fear turned into action. A group of tradesmen armed themselves with guns and bludgeons and set out to hunt whatever had done this. They tracked the prints from the town into the woods, where they sent their best hunting dogs into the thicket. The dogs ran back, tails between their legs, baying, refusing to re-enter the shadows. The men, wisely, went home. Not everyone reached for theology to explain the strange event, though. In the darker corners of English pub culture, another explanation was circulating, one that was, in its own way, just as unsettling as the devil. Spring-heeled Jack. He first appeared in London around 1837, a figure so strange that the newspapers initially dismissed him as fiction. Witnesses described a tall, thin entity with a diabolical face and eyes that glowed like red balls of fire. He wore a tight white oilskin garment beneath a dark cloak. His hands were fitted with metallic claws. Jack also seemed to possess some unnatural abilities. He vaulted over 9-foot walls with contemptuous ease, cackling in a high-pitched register as he landed. He could reportedly vomit blue and white flames directly into the faces of those who encountered him. By the 1840s and early 50s, Jack had largely gone quiet. Some wondered, in February of 1855, whether Devon was seeing his return. The connection wasn't just thematic. The footprints appearing on rooftops, clearing high walls, vanishing across rivers, those perfectly matched the leaping figure from London folklore. And Devon had already had a brush with this particular legend. In July of 1847, a Spring-Heeled Jack investigation in Teignmouth, one of the very same places now covered in mysterious prints, led to the conviction of a Captain Finch. He had been assaulting women while dressed in a skin coat, a skull cap, horns, and a mask. There's one other thread in this story that sometimes gets overlooked. Just 1 month before the Great Devon Mystery, in January of 1855, similar prints had appeared on the snowy rooftops of pubs in the West Midlands. Local papers there had already given the phenomenon a name: Leaping Lucifer. Whatever was in Devon, it had apparently been warming up. As the story spread to the national press, the intellectuals of the day began to come forward with their theories to explain the mystery. Among the first responses came not from a scientist, but from a correspondent simply writing as South Devon. He had spent 5 months the previous winter in the backwoods of Canada, tracking wild animals through deep snow. He had seen bear, fox, otter, hare, everything that moved. He wrote he had never in his life seen a more clearly defined track than the ones in Devon, and that no known animal, not one, walks in such a perfect, unbroken, single file. No quadruped, no bird, not even a human. The comparative anatomist Richard Owen, who actually coined the word dinosaur, proposed badgers. He argued that a badger places its back feet into the prints of its front feet, creating a single file line, and that the freeze-thaw action of the sunlight that morning had distorted the shape of the imprint into something resembling a hoof. Owen's theory could explain the tracks, but not the traveler. It offered no solution for a badger crossing a 2-mile saltwater estuary, or how a burrowing animal could scale a vertical wall and vanish through a 4-inch drainpipe. The Reverend G.M. Musgrave offered his congregation an explanation. Escaped kangaroos. He later admitted he made the whole thing up, in his words, a pious lie. He invented the kangaroo story specifically to distract his parishioners from the belief that Satan was loose in Devonshire. Whether that reflects more on the Reverend's pragmatism or his faith in his congregation is a question I'll leave with you. Years later, the author Geoffrey Household proposed a mechanical theory. An experimental weather balloon had escaped from Devonport dockyard, he suggested. 2 metal shackles trailing from its mooring ropes had dragged and hopped across the county as the balloon bobbled in the wind, clearing walls, crossing rooftops, skipping over rivers. Household source was a local man named Major Carter, whose grandfather had worked at Devonport at the time. Carter claimed the incident had been quietly hushed up because the balloon had also wrecked a number of conservatories, greenhouses, and windows before finally coming down. It's quite the detailed theory. But skeptics pointed out that a balloon traveling 100 miles would inevitably become tangled in trees or telegraph poles, and the chances of the balloon surviving the entire night in perfect condition requires its own kind of faith. A brewer named Thomas Fox offered something different entirely. He submitted illustrations showing how a hopping wood mouse leaping through snow leaves a print that closely resembles a cloven hoof, the motion of its limbs on landing creating that split shape. Researcher Mike Dash, who spent years collecting the primary sources, concluded that the wood mouse probably explains at least some of the Devon prints, including some found on the rooftops. A mouse can hop along a roofline easily enough. On the more creative end, someone proposed a unipede, a fabulous one-legged mammal allegedly last sighted in Labrador in 1001 AD by an Icelandic explorer. Someone else wrote in to report that he had followed a set of the prints to their end and found waiting for him a single toad. The writer admitted the toad was probably not responsible. These were not foolish people grasping at nonsense. They were people genuinely trying, with the tools available to them, to explain something that resisted explanation. The unipede and the toad are not punchlines. They are evidence of how completely this event captured imaginations and defeated rational inquiry. None of these explanations, not Owen's badger or Musgrave's kangaroo, not Household's balloon, not Fox's mouse, accounts for all of it. Mike Dash's own conclusion, after examining every available source, was some of the tracks were probably hoaxes, some were probably made by common animals, and some remain unexplained. There's a quieter explanation that may be most unsettling of all. Not for what it says about the prints, but for what it says about us. Modern analysis suggests that the press played an active role in constructing the legend itself. By aggregating reports from over 30 separate locations into one continuous narrative, newspapers helped solidify the unlikely idea of a single unbroken trail, 100 miles covered in one night. The story was, at least partly, an editorial creation, local strangeness assembled into a national mystery, which raises a fair question. How many of those 30 towns actually reported prints, and how many simply reported that the prints had been reported? The tracks appeared on one or two subsequent nights in the area that same week, but less dramatically, and then they stopped. Devon returned to its winter silence. The mystery settled into folklore, cited occasionally in periodicals, revisited by writers and cryptozoologists and historians who all arrived at the same conclusion. No single theory explains everything. But interestingly, Devon wasn't the only place this happened. In May 1840, 15 years before, Captain Sir James Clark Ross landed at the Kerguelen Islands, a frozen, desolate archipelago in the southern Indian Ocean, thousands of miles from any civilization. In the snow there, his expedition found single-file, horseshoe-shaped tracks. Ross wrote in his published account that he saw no land animals on the island, yet the prints were unmistakably those of a pony or donkey, shaped exactly like a horseshoe. His crew spent 2 months searching the island for the source. They found nothing. Ross made a note of it, moved on, filing it as a curiosity at the edge of the world. In that winter of 1855, the Victorian snow eventually melted. The story went cold. A century and a half passed, and then the tracks came again. On March 5th, 2009, a woman named Jill Wade woke up in Woolsey, North Devon, and went out into her garden. There, in the freshly fallen snow, was a line of hoof-like prints, approximately 5 inches long, stretching 60 to 70 feet across her garden in an arch, starting at a window, disappearing without explanation on the other side of her yard. A biologist, Graham Inglis, came and examined them. He attributed the prints to a rabbit or hare that had been distorted by the snow. He also noted that they were peculiar. He acknowledged the immediate resemblance to those events of 1855, and he mentioned, almost in passing, that the find had sparked quite an academic punch-up about the true origin of the marks. 145 years later between events, same county, same shape, same vanishing act. What walked through Devon that night, whatever ranged across 100 miles of frozen English countryside, cleared the walls, crossed the rooftops, squeezed through pipes, and made dogs refuse to follow their instructions, left no answers behind. Only a straight, single file line of impressions in the snow, and the knowledge that for a few hours, something moved through the world without physical limitation. Questions pressed into the snow and carried into legend. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. For information on our Alone in the Dark experiences at Cumberland Village in Ottawa, or the Village at Black Creek in Toronto, or any of our ghost tours, please visit hauntedwalk.com. If you are enjoying our episodes, we would greatly appreciate you following, rating, and reviewing the show wherever you listen. And if you know someone who likes the same topics that we do, we hope you will recommend Haunted Talks to them. As always, special thanks to our Haunted Talks team, including Michelle Dennis, our outstanding audio editor. Until we meet again, keep an eye on those tracks in the snow, and sweet dreams.